I was listening to a couple of Boris lectures today.
And sure, Boris lectures, or he just asks a lot of questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of talks he gave, and I listened to an 8-hour David Wynn Miller thing on the English language. Now, I walked away with a completely different take on the English language than what he was trying to teach there. Here's kind of what I walked away. The English language is basically used in legal and commercial circles as a commercial language. We use commercial terminology like litigant and perjury and evidence and driver and traffic and all the rest of it. But the English language is something that we're using, but everything in law and commerce is owned by according to the documentation, everything is owned by someone. There's always ownership floating around there somewhere.
That being an assumption?
Well, all the documentation, the California Government Code, California Uniform Commercial Code, California Government Code, California Constitution, California Tax Revenue, they all talk about ownership of and by the state, or of and by the people of the state of California, which is a political body. But they're always talking about ownership and ownership rights and taxation. So the thing is, if we're all using the English language as a commercial language to enter into contracts and lay claim to property and exercise of rights and dealing with issues like trespassing and stealing, why not give a disclaimer right up front? In other words, we're always jumping around like a cat on a hot tin roof trying to say, well, allegedly.
What's this we?
Well, I hear a lot of people do it. That's allegedly this and an area called California. We try to avoid it, but instead of using the English language as a commercial language, why not just put a universal disclaimer right up front and say,
Would making a disclaimer be a admission and confession?
Well, I use the English language as a rudimentary form of communication, not as a commercial device to close contracts and make business deals. If I was to talk to you and say, well, I during the course of this conversation, if I ever use the words my or mine, I want you to understand very clearly that I don't mean that I'm making a legal claim of ownership when I say my or mine. During the course of this conversation, whenever I say those words, maybe accidentally, I don't want to say whoops. I want you to know that when I use those words, I mean that I just mean that I'm using things temporarily. That's what I mean by those words. And if I ask you, do you agree and do you understand with what I just said, and you say yes, okay, now I can kind of breathe easier and go, good. Now I don't have to watch every time I say my or mine. I don't have to hold my breath or dance around it. I can just come out and say it because I've let you know right up front that that's what I mean by those words. That's just kind of a getting that out of the way.
Well, the thing of it is, the way I look at it, it's a renewing of the mind, and the more we realize that we're using it in general language, I believe most people believe when they say mine, it's mine, unless I relinquish it to somebody else. And that's just the basic way people think. And I think it's renewing of the mind to get in the habit, me personally anyway, to be in the habit of saying, I use, or the book, or the book I have possession of at the moment that I'm using is a better way to speak all the time instead of just...
I think you're right. I think it's better to get in the habit of just using benign words that don't lead down that path of...
Because I believe if you study the statutes, so-called laws, they're all ambiguous. All they need you is to fill in the blanks or start talking in negatives, telling them what you're not, doing disclaimers. Why bring it up in the first place?